Thank you. Councilman Anderton.
Thank you, Council President. I can't respond to everybody, but just, as I synthesize all the information, the adjunct, political science professor at Montclair State, I appreciate the separation of powers. Generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of referendum and initiative, even as a citizen. I don't think it's necessarily done a great deal for the benefit of the residents of California. Having said that, the law is the laws, and I will respect and appreciate the result of any election. All of us are only here by virtue of a result of an election. So if we can't appreciate and abide by the results of an election, then that's inappropriate. So I totally support citizens' rights, but certainly with any, of course, that goes without saying. I'm a citizen myself, but the democratic process is only as good as the information that goes into it. And democracy is imperfect. There's no question. So as was mentioned, I received a few phone calls as well, 2 or 3 calls from residents who signed the petition but weren't sure exactly of the information or what have you. And that's fine. And it's no different for them to express their concerns to their elected officials as it is for anyone who comes here and speaks to express their concerns to elected officials. So perhaps in that respect, an initiative or a referendum on the issue will be good, because that will get the information out there and let people make a decision. So that's fine, and if that's warranted, then that's what will happen, and we'll all abide by it. As I'm thinking in my mind about what the next steps might be, though, I believe fully that the $6.3 million is not the make or break, and I think Mr. Schmidt was sort of addressing this. $6.3 million of the public bonding is not the make or break of this project. I mean, this project is privately owned. I haven't spoken to anyone from PRISM about this. It makes sense to me, however, that they wouldn't want to lose tens of millions of dollars that they may have already invested, over $6 million. I'm not necessarily a businessman. I guess I'm an entrepreneur in my business, but it just doesn't make sense that they would allow that to happen. So I'm confident that if the $6.3 million, I would imagine anyway, I shouldn't say I'm confident, but I would imagine that if the public bonding is voted down, that doesn't necessarily stop the project, right? They would still want to proceed. They would have to make up the $6.3 million in other types of funding, or perhaps save that money and lower the cost of the construction. I don't know, but it struck me when Councilman Cirillo was reading the list of infrastructure, for example, we might get a less robust result. If they have to make up $6 million somewhere, we might get a less robust public improvement. We might get less robust units, perhaps, or whatever the case may be. So just keep in mind, and I guess in the course of a public discourse or discussion about this, that's something that's entirely possible. We might not get as good a project as we would otherwise get without the $6.3 million. I don't know, but we'll obviously continue to have that discussion. For the first time, I'm thinking about that because we do have an election, and that's perhaps one of the implications. With respect to the worst case scenario, one of the speakers said, well, we've never discussed the worst case scenario. We've often discussed the worst case scenario, and once again, the worst case scenario is if they complete, do the work. I guess the worst case scenario is they never get off the ground. It's not going to happen if solely by virtue of the fact that there's been so much money invested. They will at least do the work, I'm imagining. The worst case scenario then is what if they can't rent any of the units? Well, we still have contractually a $650,000 minimum, right? Our pilot arrangement calls for 10% of gross income, or $650 million. So at some point, that's our worst case scenario. $650,000. I'm sorry, that would have been a good case scenario. So I think that's our worst case scenario. That revenue, $650,000, and we've discussed that. And similar questions were raised about what ifs. I've thought about what ifs quite a bit since our last council meeting. The risks involved in this particular project really are no different than what ifs that might exist and do exist, quite frankly, in this economy with any other large taxpayer. What if Petco goes out of business? What if Macy's decides to leave Essex Green? I mean, those vacancies that could happen, commercial vacancies, what if the medical arts building, folds or they move to a different, I mean, there are what ifs inherent in every budget we put together. There are what ifs inherent in every taxpayer. What if Sal and Rose can't pay their mortgage? Then our home and the taxes that we pay won't be there for the town, right? I mean, so these what ifs are no different on this particular project than they are for every other taxpayer, commercial or otherwise. Similarly, you know, and I've heard a lot of folks who express concerns say, well, we just want a different type of project. I mean, none of us, right, are reasonably opposed to improving the building. Well, would we get a different type of development there? What if we get a commercial development? What if we get a mall? What if we get a medical arts building? Well, the same what ifs will exist then. What if they can't rent it? What if they can't, you know, get an anchor tenant? So the same what ifs will always be there, whether the project is, or whether this building is commercial, medical, retail, industrial. The same what ifs will always be there. For that reason, I'm just not convinced that those what if scenarios they're not convincing me, because they'll exist no matter what form this project takes. Similarly, whoever moves in there, whether it's commercial, retail, office, whatever the use is, they have to clean the property up. They have to renovate it in a historical fashion that is required, right, and resurface it and finish the building the way it's required to be done. So the cost is going to be the same, right? The cost roughly will be the same. It will cost more than it's worth at the end. That's the very definition of why it's a redevelopment project, because it will cost more than it will be worth. And no one who's in business is in business to lose money. So they will only do that because of the tax incentives that are provided through the redevelopment. I mean, it's just a matter of business. So again, the same what ifs, the same risks are there because the same costs are there, whether it's commercial, retail, medical arts, whatever the case may be. Let's face it, Main Street is not Route 10. It's not South Orange Avenue. It's not, you know, it's not a major thoroughfare. So it's not going to have the same demand for commercial. I mean, and I'm not, you know, any real estate expert, but it just makes sense to me that it's not going to have the same type of attraction for commercial development that Route 10 or Route 46 or some other major road would. Of course it doesn't. Similarly, it doesn't warrant the same type of commercial development that you might get in downtown of Westfield, let's say, or downtown Summit. It's just not. So what, you know, and again, so you know, to answer, you know, to speak to you, Mr. Sanders, for a moment, I'm not throwing my hands up in the air saying there's not anything else we can get. But what I'm saying is that I've thought honestly and diligently and fairly and objectively about this proposal. It's the proposal that's before us. It's privately owned. So, you know, I don't think it's an outrageous proposal. I don't think that the what-ifs or the risks are any greater here than they might be on the next proposal that might come down the pike, whenever that might be. But believe me,
well, I'm not a crook.
No one's corrupt,
I've earned
dumb,
everything I've
or
done.
incompetent. Okay, that's not the case here. So, you know, I'm not corrupt. I'm not aware of anyone who's corrupt or is involved in this on the lam, or, you know, in any way trying to make money off of this. I'm not aware of that. I've said that publicly numerous times, and no one's come up here and accused anyone else of being involved. So again, honestly, objectively, as I look at this is by all objective standards, you know, a reasonably well thought out, transit-oriented, rehabilitative reuse proposal. I mean, that's just what happens. That's what happened in downtown Jersey City. That's what happened in Broadway. You know, in a lot of areas where you've had these types of redevelopments. So again, if you look at it objectively, I think I have. And if the voters don't feel that way, then, you know, there are other issues I hope that they consider that this council has succeeded on. Certainly, you know, as the Star Ledger has reported, you know, our property tax burden by the township has been maintained with the lowest, you know, 1 in 5 year property tax burden in Essex County in terms of growth, percentage growth. We've done well. Our town has been well run the last couple of years. We forget that because we've been talking about this issue and it is so contentious. So the fact of the matter is, and the Star Ledger has kind of shown that research, they've relied on Department of Community Affairs for their data, but, you know, we've held the line on property taxes. That's an important issue as well, perhaps even more important than this redevelopment project. So I'm not sure, you know, how much more I can add other than, you know, I can assure the public that, you know, I can only speak for myself, but I think we've all been diligent. We've all been objective or tried to be objective, and we'll continue to do so. And we'll certainly will abide by whatever result the democratic process takes in this. That's only fair. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman.